This is essentially like a little finger, and it's got a point on the other side which comes in very handy between teeth. This is a fairly common sculpting tool. It's a little thin wire that has kind of a V shape, and it's got another shape on the other side. I don't use as much, but sometimes. Then, now this is the exotic one, but it's got little teeny teeth on the end of the rake. You got a circle on one side, a square on the other. I use the square almost always. This is very important. I'm going to show you why later. It's a very, very fine wire that's kind of got a V on it. These are just like the other rake. They've got a rough edge, that's a serrated edge, and it helps with large anatomy. Not critical, very helpful. A little black sponge that's used for smoothing. This is extremely porous. You can find it in beauty shops, sculpting supply places. A little bit more exotic. Calipers are very nice. Now, we're going to go over some of this as far as sizing, where to put the eyes and so forth. Calipers help a lot. This is very fancy. I got this at Reynolds Sculpting Supply. It's for cutting clay. You can adjust the thickness of the clay to very thin to very thick. Just speeds it up. Paintbrushes. I like a big one for, you know, early on, and then a little one to go in around the eyes and stuff like this. Fairly soft bristle. This got a little stiffness to it. Oh, it's got a little smoke too. A knife to cut the clay. This tool, it's got teeth around it. It's kind of a kidney-shaped tool. This is very helpful with large anatomy, and we'll be going over that also. A sponge, water in a little bucket, and a spray bottle. Need some kind of armature. Now, normally I would sculpt on a head bust, but I was trying to do this from ground up. Like you're starting fresh and you don't want to spend $200 getting all this stuff before you can even get started. You might find out you hate it. So there's an armature I just made out of wood. Now, you can sculpt eyes, but it's very nice if you find some balls or something like this about the size you need. And these are plastic ones I've poured up, but you can find all sorts of things that are round. These are texture sponges. I got these from Jordu. There's places around the house you can find cool textures. Maybe it's some old leather thing, or maybe it's an orange or grapefruit or something like that. And these you push into the clay toward the end of the sculpture to make skin texture. And this helps to hammer the clay onto your armature to make sure that there aren't a lot of air bubbles and things, and it's really wrapped around your structure. I just took a 4x4 and cut it kind of fancy and wrapped some tape around it so it doesn't stick so much, duct tape.
The best tool that you have as a sculptor, especially in the early stage of blocking out a sculpture, is your hands. So, you know, you're putting clay on and making your hand into a little kind of a rake shape and just kind of pulling it around. And that, you know, most of the sculpture can be done, you know, just with your hands, rolling little noodles or little boogers and just putting them in different spots. But when you have to, you know, there's certain tools that kind of help you out in different things. Like, you know, this little crazy wire, cut little chunks out of your clay, you know, whatever shapes you need or whatever. It just makes it easy to kind of get the clay, you know, even and out there. Tools like this is a big, you know, size rake, and it's got these, it's like a ribbon of metal, and it's got these little, you know, notches worked into it that make it like a rake. You have this kind of like a grid pattern shape that you just rake over the forms of your sculpture. And as you can see, what it does is it takes clay from the high points and puts it in the low points. It fills the low points. So it's really evening out the surface of the clay. Now, the shape is round, which is nice because you can like really move around the round forms of your sculpture. But if you look, there are different kinds of rakes. For instance, this one is a similar size, but it's a different shape. It's got more of a flat, you know, triangle to it. So it's a similar concept. It's just a little harsher. You know, this has much deeper grooves in the rake, and but these are still the same size. So at this point in your sculpture, you know, this size rake is really good for finding those forms. Now, if you look, rakes and the shapes of rakes stay the same, and the shapes of really all your sculpture tools pretty much stay the same. They just they differ in size. So I have a tiny little rake here, which, you know, would be used for kind of rounding out smaller forms. Like if I had a big wrinkle here, and it doesn't really make sense for this sculpture, but just to show you guys, you know, I can use this tinier rake, which is still making those little tiny rake marks, but just on a smaller scale, to soften up the smaller forms. Your loop tools, which are, you know, this similar to rakes, they just don't have those grooves in them. They're just, you know, different shapes and loops. As you can see, we have the same round shape, you know, for making small little round wrinkle shapes and stuff. And then you have one that's just a little bigger. It's making just different sizes of the same shape pretty much. And on this side, we have this little triangle kind of arrowhead looking tool, which is really good for getting, you know, tighter little wrinkly shapes and stuff like that. More for detailing and finding the, you know, the area and forms of different stuff. Here's another example of a similar tool, just pretty much the same shape, just a different size, you know, a different grade wire, and you can get in there and do much finer, you know, tiny little details. Spatula, like spoon, weird round shape on one end made of wood, and it's machined and filed down, you know, to be that nice shape, flat on one side, round on the other. And this shape is actually really valuable too. It repeats in other different tools. This is a dental tool with a very similar shape to that. And, you know, it's just a different size, a different type of tool, so you can do the same basic thing, finding forms and shapes, you know, with that little spatula, but you can also do it, you know, on a different scale with this one. So your tools are usually the same thing, just repeating, you know, different sizes and different types of tools. You know, I use this steak knife as a rake. I mean, these serrated, you know, edges of the blade here actually work to you know, give you that kind of similar pattern that evens out all those surfaces. You see, all those grooves that I carved in with the other tools are gone, and all I had to do is just pull the clay from one part to the next over those deep recessed areas, and it just kind of spackles it right up. And just when something's big like this is a nice tool to kind of just move the clay around and find the shapes really quickly. Obviously, it's not a refining tool, but for, you know, the point that we're at, you know, you can really do some cool stuff. And if you have a big chunk of a shape that you don't want, you know, you just get in there and just slice it off. It's pretty handy.
One of the huge things is rakes. Rakes are super important. If you think about it, rakes are almost like sandpaper for wood, because they're what evens out the surface of the sculpture and starts to get rid of the imperfections. Now, having different shapes is super important. Two of my favorites are these Kemper loop tool rakes. This circle and this more kind of flat rake, because that gives you a lot of opportunity for different shapes, you know. Anywhere where the square might not work, the circle might, and vice versa. What I also really like to use on a large sculpture like this are these. You can find this under the name reticulated foam, stipple sponges. They use them for aquarium filters. My personal preference is the more open-celled and coarse, the better. What I like to do is I like to dip these in water once the sculpture has been a little more refined and the surfaces are even and everything's raked down. I dip this in water and use it as an abrasive to really start smoothing the surface out and get it to a good point for being able to accept the texture. Now, before that comes along, I'll also take one of these sponges. Now, you can use sea sponges, you can use sponges that you might use to wash a car, but these big yellow circular ones are really nice. And these are kind of your finest grit sandpaper, going back to that analogy. So once it's all been abrased with this, the stipple sponge, I take this and wet it and really start to smooth that out, get all of the scratch marks out, and you can wring this out once you're done doing that and stipple it over the surface, which gives you kind of a base skin texture. I wouldn't call it a final skin texture, but it gives you a really nice base to get started. And I'll keep going back to this while I'm texturing the sculpture and just stipple on top of it. It helps to knock everything down and keep it natural. And this will also help in the production process. When you're doing a rub out, If it's a completely smooth surface, the alcohol on the surface has a tendency to want to drip, but if it has little pores and pockets to break that surface tension, the alcohol won't have a tendency to drip and create weird little drying lines of ink that's collected in those strips. So this can really help for the painting process as well.
Now this is another tool you have to have. You can't live without it. This is thin metal, but it's rounded and it has little teeth all the way around. You will use this all the time, and it's great for shaping because it'll bend as you scrape it across. You can bend it, and it just helps you shape the large anatomy. Unlike this other one that's real thin, flexible metal to bend around stuff, this one's thick, and it's got teeth on one side. This really helps out when you're cleaning up dams and things. It's not super useful except in the very early stages of getting large proportions figured out on your sculpture or worked in. This is a slightly rubbery plastic tool. Same kind of thing. It's curved. It's got different, like tight curve, loose curve, and then a right angle. Use this all the time. Light is very important. You need good overhead lights. The new LED lights you can get for, we just bought some, like $24 for a 4-foot light, and they're nuclear. It's nice if the lights, instead of having one directly overhead, get them as high as you can in the corners so they're aiming like this and they crisscross. That'll help with shadows. The same's true in the painting department.